Before watching this episode, I recommend that you go and watch the Why and How to Train Cutting and the Recipe for Successful Cuts episodes. The links are in the description. You should also note that this and the next episode will be quite heavy on the theory side. This is because they are laying down the foundation for everything that comes afterwards. You might want to watch these episodes a couple of times, or alternatively, take some notes. Then, take a few things at a time and then implement those to your training. If you really aren't interested in the theory and just want to get to the exercises, you might want to skip to episode 3. However, as said, this theory is the foundation for everything that comes afterwards, so you will be skipping some very important stuff. In this episode, we'll be going over how to have a sound structure to support your cutting. We'll be starting from ground up and going all the way to your wrists. How to hold a long sword will be handled in the next episode. The whole idea behind good structure is to lose as little energy on impact as possible and maintain a straight trajectory and a good edge alignment. The impact in this case being your sword hitting your target. In a perfect mathematical world, when the sword hits the target, the only force affecting it is the reaction force from the target. However, in reality, this is not even nearly the case. There is a human holding the sword, and the human body is far from perfectly rigid. Hopefully, we are standing on a rigid surface with enough friction to keep us from moving. However, there are still quite a few joints between the ground and the sword. Every single one of those joints will bend more or less, and lose some of the force driving the sword through the target. I call this leaking energy. You have a kinetic chain starting from the ground and going all the way to the tip of the sword. The goal of a good structure is to make this kinetic chain as leak-free as possible. And do note that I say as leak-free as possible. The kinetic chain will never be even nearly leak-free. We just want to get as close as possible. Now, let's go through how to make you a rigid human being. A great deal of your stance comes from your posture. A bad posture will subject your spine to an unnecessary amount of stress and increase the risk of injury. In addition to that, a bad posture will greatly hinder your power generation. To cut, we want to rotate around our spine, recruiting our strong leg and core muscles to power to cut. Our arms and other upper body muscles are relatively weak when compared to our legs and core. Because of that, we don't really want to use those to cut. Also notice that using your arms to cut makes it more difficult to keep the cutting trajectory straight. A neutral spine allows us to safely generate high rotational forces around our spine and to effectively activate our core muscles. In addition to generating rotation, our core ties our upper body to our lower body. If we can't effectively recruit our core, we will be leaking all of our lower body strength when cutting. It is completely possible to generate rotation from our legs and hips and lose all of that power in our core. We are holding our sword in our hands, and our hands are connected to our shoulders via our arms. Because of this, to move the sword vertically, we need the rotation to come from our shoulders. To even begin, you need to have a neutral standing posture, or you don't really have anything to build on. If it is difficult to maintain a neutral standing posture, it is possible that you have muscle weaknesses or tightnesses. In this case, you should contact a professional on how to fix your standing posture. Here is a short checklist for a neutral posture. Stand with your feet shoulder width apart. Have your legs straight but not locked. You need to have a neutral pelvis position. If you have anterior pelvic tilt, you need to rotate your pelvis backwards. If you have posterior pelvic tilt, you need to rotate your pelvis forwards. If you have either of these, they are going to stress your lower back, increasing the risk of injury and reducing your power generation capability. Stand tall with your shoulders in a neutral position. You can think this as back and down. However, you don't actually want to pull your shoulders back and together. The shoulder is a ball and socket joint, which makes it extremely mobile. The negative thing is that to protect it from injuries, it needs a lot of support from the muscles surrounding it. To properly stabilize your shoulder joint and to protect it from injuries, it is important to have your shoulder in a neutral position. Having your shoulders forwards is okay if the force is coming from the front, such as being in the plank position. However, when using a sword, there are forces directed to your shoulder on multiple planes. Having your shoulder in a neutral position allows your upper back muscles to stabilize your scapula to protect your shoulder joint. Your head should be in line with your shoulders and your chin up. Now that you have a good neutral posture, it is easier and more efficient to activate your core to stabilize your spine and prevent injuries, to connect your lower and upper body, and to generate power. An important part of core stabilization is activating your diaphragm. This is sometimes called bracing. Diaphragm is part of the deepest part of our core muscles, stabilizing the lower back and pelvis. Activating your diaphragm is actually what you are doing when bracing to lift weights. You may have heard of kiai in Japanese martial arts. It is a shout done when attacking, and similar techniques are used in other Eastern martial arts. One effect of kiai is that it activates your diaphragm, increasing your core stability. This then increases your power generation. You should use a technique of your choice to activate your diaphragm during cuts and thrusts. One way of doing this is to exhale sharply out through your mouth. To do this, breathe deep into your stomach and then activate your abs by exhaling sharply. And the way to do this is as follows. Stand straight in a neutral posture. Place a hand on your belly and give some pressure. Breathe deep to your stomach, trying to push your hand away. You should feel tension in your core. This is the diaphragm activating. Now, breathe out, activating your abdominal muscles while keeping the tension from the diaphragm. You should feel your abs bracing against the diaphragm. Do note that you are not trying to pull your navel to your spine. To be able to do that, you can't have your diaphragm in the way to brace against. Now, exercise this bracing technique and incorporate it to your cutting and fencing training. Do note that it is extremely difficult to activate your diaphragm if your pelvis is not in a neutral position. It might feel counterintuitive, but the soles of your feet are structurally one of the most important parts of your body. Hopefully everyone has heard the phrase, for every reaction there is an equal and opposite reaction. If you rotate from right to left to swing a sword, there must be an equal rotation from left to right. This is where grounding comes in. The opposite rotation goes to the ground through our feet. We want to have as solid contact with the ground as possible to make this as effective as possible. SwordStem has a really good article on this. The link is in the description. Now that we understand that having solid contact with the ground is of utmost importance, how do we actually achieve this? In the end, everything boils down to having as many contact points with the ground as possible. Let's start with the foot. You do not want to stand on the balls of your feet when cutting. This gives you extra mobility, but it reduces the foot from a tripod to a bipod. To have a proper 3-point contact with the ground, you want to distribute the weight on the heel, the ball of the big toe, and the ball of the little toe. This forms the tripod of the foot. If you stand on the balls of your feet, in addition to losing a point of contact with the ground, you will be also adding an extra joint to stabilize. As mentioned in the intro, every joint will leak energy. By completely eliminating a joint, we eliminate any leakage it might have. Now, here is a simple test to demonstrate this. At this point, it is important to mention that if you stand on one foot so that you do not allow your foot to rotate, you subject your knee to a rotational force. As your knee is not designed to rotate around this axis, there is a real chance of injury. I do not recommend that you replicate this demonstration, but if you decide to do so, understand that you are doing so on your own risk. This is also why it is important to have both of your feet on the ground when cutting. Stand on one foot with only the balls of your foot making contact with the ground. Now swing your arm as you would be cutting with a sword. You should notice that swinging hard is rather difficult and your foot is very likely to rotate on the ground. You are leaking energy. Now, stand on one foot and stand on the full tripod of the foot. Again, swing your arm. You should notice that it is easier to make a strong swing and that it is less likely that your foot rotates on the ground. This is of course highly dependent on the floor and possible footwear surface. Standing on ice on dress shoes will definitely not have enough friction to keep your foot from rotating. The same can be said about grass and historical leather-soled shoes. As said earlier, everything boils down to having as many contact points with the ground as possible. Because of this, you should have both of your feet on the ground whenever you are cutting. A simple test to demonstrate the difference of having both feet on the ground is as follows. Do note that when standing on one foot, this will subject your knee to an unhealthy rotational force. I do not recommend that you try to do this yourself. If you do, understand that you are doing it at your own risk, and I highly recommend that you use slippery footwear to minimize the friction. Stand facing a wall at a corner and brace your core. Stand on one foot and try to make it rotate on the floor by pushing against the wall with your arm. Now, repeat but stand with both feet on the ground with a shoulder width or wider stance. You should notice that it is much harder to make yourself rotate with both feet on the ground. Again, you should not stand on the balls of your feet as it will add an extra joint you need to stabilize. Now that we have the soles of our feet steadily on the ground, it is time to talk about stance. A wider and lower stance aids in stability and power generation. In a wider stance, you naturally bring your center of gravity lower, which aids in stability. You can enhance that by bending your knees to bring your center of gravity even lower. With bent knees, you are also more effectively able to recruit your legs for power generation. Bent knees also work as springs to absorb impact forces. This might not exactly be necessary when cutting, but in martial context, this is extremely valuable. To begin constructing your stance, you should make it as long as it is wide. You can think this as placing your feet at opposite corners of a square so that you face a side. I recommend starting with at least 1.5 times shoulder width. I have yet to see anyone with a too wide stance to start with. Use this as a starting point and then adjust the width and length as necessary so that the stance feels natural. I would again recommend going wider and deeper than feels completely comfortable at the beginning. You also want to evenly distribute your weight on both legs. This is especially important when having a slippery ground and footwear combination. Do not go for a too narrow stance, as it will make it extremely difficult to resist sideways motions. This is extremely detrimental for cutting performance, as the rotational forces tend to work in these directions. It also makes chaining cuts extremely difficult. The toes of your front foot should point directly forwards. Instead of having the toes of your rear foot pointing directly forwards or to the side, they should be somewhere in between. This allows your hip the greatest range of motion to both directions. The exact angle of your rear foot is somewhat dependent on how your femur connects to your pelvis. Personally, I need to have my rear foot's toes pointed more to the side to have a proper range of motions to both directions. Also note that different cuts benefit from slightly different stances. When cutting, you should stand so that in the end position of the cut, your hips are open and your hips and chest point in the same direction. This mimics the end position of a cut with a passing step. More about this in the cut-specific episodes. On the other hand, stepping will be handled in its own episode, as it is a rather complex subject. Now that we are well grounded, it is a good time to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Our bodies naturally tend to move in rotations. Just think about your joints. Your elbows, shoulders, knees, ankles, and hips all rotate on one or more planes. Your body is also very efficient in generating rotation around your spine. This is why we want to use these rotations to power our cuts. To demonstrate this as simply as possible, we are going to make some quite significant physics simplifications. In my opinion, these are actually close enough that they can be used to explain these phenomena. And they are understandable to most people, and that includes me. Someone more into the exact physics of this would most definitely be able to explain this more accurately and with less simplifications. Now imagine that we hold a sword in front of us and want to cut down in a straight line. To do this, we basically have to drop down our whole body. If we use our arms, there is going to be rotation. We can also achieve a linear cut by stepping past our target. We know that speed can be calculated as distance divided by time. In the linear cut example, our shoulders, hands, and the tip of our sword are all moving down the same distance in the same time. Thus, their speed is the same. If we go down twice as fast, or in other words, half the time, the tip of our sword will move twice as fast, as will our shoulders and hands. Now, why does this actually matter? Because when boiled down a lot, cutting requires energy. The more we have, the better. When a sharp sword hits the target, we want to cut into it and keep the sword moving. The more energy we have, the more efficient the sword will be cutting into the target, presuming the other important things such as edge alignment are correct. The more energy we have, the more we can afford to lose before the sword comes to a stop. In other words, stops cutting. We can simplify this to kinetic energy. In other words, the energy an object has due to its motion. In this case, the object is the sword we are swinging, the motion is the swinging of the sword, and the energy is what we are going to need to cut. Kinetic energy can be calculated as half of an object's mass multiplied by velocity squared. From this it is easy to see that the velocity is very important. As the velocity is squared, if it doubles, the kinetic energy quadruples. So if we want to hit harder, in other words, with more energy, we should concentrate on increasing the velocity of our sword, or as people usually put it, the tip speed. At this point, it is important to mention that we are not actually interested in the tip speed of our sword. Instead, we are interested in the velocity of the part of the sword which is going to come into contact with our target. You are soon going to understand why this should be as close to the tip as possible. To explain this, let's make some mathematical simplifications. The circumference of a circle can be calculated as 2 times pi times the radius. If the radius doubles, the circumference doubles. The radius in this example is going to be your reach. Reach being basically the distance from your shoulder to the tip of the sword. To make this example mathematically easier, we are going to presume a 360-degree cutting arc. This makes the distance the tip of your sword travels the circumference of the circle. Again, this is a simplification as we are using a 360-degree rotation instead of an arc and speed instead of velocity. Also, we are ignoring the rotational nature of this motion. Now, imagine a situation where your arm is as long as the blade of your sword, and there is an 180-degree angle between your forearm and the sword blade. This makes the radius from your shoulder to the point of the sword double the radius from your shoulder to the hilt of the sword. You cut with a rotation around your shoulder. You do it so that your hand and the sword hilt it is holding are moving at the exact same speed as in the example before. Now, what about the tip of the sword? As your reach, or the distance from your shoulder to the tip of the sword, is double the distance from your shoulder to your hand, the tip of the sword is now moving double the distance your hand is moving. As said earlier, speed can be calculated as distance divided by time. If the distance doubles and the time stays the same, the speed doubles. Once again, this is a really drastic simplification, but it will do for now. From this you can see that when you want cutting performance, rotation is the way to go. This gets us to extension. Extension simply means having our arm straight to achieve maximum reach. Once again, there's quite a lot more depth into this than might originally seem, so let's take a closer look. As said, extension is the idea of having your arm straight to achieve maximum reach. More specifically, you want to get your arm straight before hitting your target. In the rotation section, I explained why reach is very important when it comes to speed. As a reminder, with rotation, if the reach doubles, so does the distance the tip of the sword travels. That will also double the speed of the tip of the sword if the time it takes to do the rotation stays the same. From this we get to extension. As we want to increase the speed of our sword, we also want to maximize extension. If we have our arm bent, we are losing the ever so important reach, and thus speed. To recap with significant simplifications. If we double the reach, we double the distance the tip of the sword travels for the same amount of rotation. If we double the distance traveled and keep the duration of the rotation the same, we double the speed. If we double the speed, we quadruple the kinetic energy. Proper extension is also very important from a structural point of view. With properly stabilized arms, it is much easier to maintain proper edge alignment and trajectory. Having one or both of your arms bent is often called chicken winging. It is rather common to have your non-dominant arm bent. Why this is will be explained in detail in the next episode. For now, it is enough to know that having bent arms makes it more difficult to maintain proper edge alignment and trajectory. This makes it more likely that your sword turns inside your target and gets stuck. This should explain in relatively simple terms why having good extension is so important. Having proper extension and cutting close to the tip can have a rather significant effect on your cutting performance. Instead of trying to hit harder, in other words, trying to use raw strength to force a powerful cut, you should actually concentrate on the speed of the sword. Again, I want to mention that these are rather significant simplifications of the underlying mechanics, but in my opinion, they are close enough that they can be used to explain how these things work. I would be more than happy to see someone give a more in-depth explanation in the physics of this, as it is out of the scope of my expertise. Now that we all agree that extension is important, let's see how to do it correctly. Firstly, you want to have full extension before hitting your target. You want to extend your elbow so that it is almost straight and not at the limit of its range of motion. If the range of motion of your elbow is past completely straight, you still don't want to extend your elbow to be completely straight or past it. If the elbow is at its maximum range of motion, any force which will extend the elbow more will go straight to the joint, and it might cause an hyperextension injury. Also, if the elbow is at its maximum range of motion, just the shock of hitting something hard can cause an elbow injury. To prevent injuries, keep the extension of your elbow a bit short of completely straight and the maximum range of motion of your elbow. To stabilize the elbow, thus preventing hyperextension and leaking of energy, you want to lock out the elbow joint. This simply means that you should have pre-tension of the muscles to prevent elbow flexion and extension. The great thing about pre-tension is that muscles are a lot stronger when they are not contracting. This is why in weight training you are able to do negative repetitions even after you have otherwise exhausted the muscle. In other words, if you have locked out the elbow joint with pre-tension before impact, your muscles can actually do a better job of protecting your joint from injury. Hyperextension is not usually an immediate issue when cutting air. However, it is easy to injure your elbow when cutting at a rigid target, such as a pell or another person. If you strike a pell or other similar object or another person at that, if you feel sudden pain at your elbow, it is very likely that you are overextending them. Because of this, it is important that you learn to stop the extension of the elbow before the end of its range of motion. You can do an exercise for this without any equipment. If you forcefully snap your elbow all the way to the end of its range of motion, there is a possibility of injury. Be careful with this exercise. To do this, have your upper arm in front of you and parallel to the ground and rest your fist on your shoulder. Start slowly and extend your arm so that you stop before it is straight or close to the end of the range of motion. To make sure there actually was range of motion left, slowly fully straighten the elbow. Then repeat and slowly add speed until you have a good grasp of what the safe range of motion of your elbow is and you are able to stop the extension in time. Do not add extra weight or do this for long periods of time. When cutting, your upper arm is also moving, which will lessen the forces on the elbow somewhat. You should note that because of this, any cut which leaves the point in line can increase the risk of injury for your elbows. More about this in the episode in which we discuss point in line cuts. Centering simply means having the sword in front of the center of your body. An easy way to demonstrate this is to straighten your arms in front of you and place your palms against each other. Now, move your arms up and down without bending your elbows. This is your center line. When cutting, you should always have your hands on the center line, or in other words, centered when hitting a target. The basic principle of centering is that it allows even extension of both of your arms. With your hands close together, moving them out of the center line will force you to bend one or both of your elbows. With a wider grip, moving out of center will force you to have your shoulders in a structurally weaker position. As explained earlier, it is extremely important to be able to have a full extension, both for structural and cutting power reasons. Because you need to have your hands, or the hilt of your sword if you like to think it that way, in the center, it places some restrictions on how we move the sword around. Very simply, the horizontal movement of your sword comes from rotation around your spine. The vertical movement comes from rotation of your shoulder. As we always want to have full extension, the distance we cut to is handled by footwork. More about that in the stepping episode. With these three mechanics, we can move the sword around in 3 dimensions. There is a bit more to vertical targeting, but more about that in the cut-specific episodes. Edge alignment is handled by the rotation of the forearm and to some extent the rotation of the shoulder. Here is a very simple exercise to demonstrate this. Start by standing in a good posture as explained before. To recap shortly, have at least shoulder width stance both in width and length, preferably more. Have bent knees and a neutral pelvis. Stand tall with neutral shoulders. Have your head between your shoulders and have your chin up. Have your arms almost straight and make sure they are not at the limit of their range of motion. Have pre-tension to support your elbow joints. Brace your core when doing the exercise. Do not stress too much about how to hold the sword right now, as we will be going through that in the next episode. For vertical movement, start with a sword or any other similar object so that it is held with extended arms above your head. Now, bring the sword down in front of you so that the only movement is the rotation of your shoulders. Remember to keep the sword centered. To demonstrate horizontal movement, have the sword or sword simulator in front of you, centered at shoulder height. Again, stand as explained earlier and have your arms properly extended and centered. Now, move the sword horizontally by only rotating from your waist. This is not actually an effective way to cut, as you would actually want to power the rotation around your spine from your legs and hips. However, this is sufficient to demonstrate the basic principle we are discussing. As all diagonal cuts combine both horizontal and vertical movement, we naturally want to combine them both. With this in mind, our actual center of rotation should be between our shoulders. In the real world, this point will actually not be exactly where we would want it to be, but at least we can aim for it. Push-pull cuts are very prevalent in HEMA and also generally a very bad idea. They go against pretty much everything I have discussed in this episode. Instead of constantly mentioning how they are a bad idea, I just gathered everything into this single section. As mentioned in the extension section, hyperextension of the elbow joint is a very bad idea. This is also why push-pull cuts can be dangerous. If you forcefully extend your dominant arm while simultaneously moving your elbow up, there is an increased risk of hyperextension injuries. As said, if you are injured, you cannot train. As you should now understand, extension is very important for speed, and speed is very important for cutting performance. If you do a push-pull cut, the center of rotation will be between your hands, not between your shoulders. Effectively, you are losing your arm's length of extension, greatly reducing your cutting power. In addition to that, you are also losing the stability of two joints in your arm, those joints being your wrist and your elbow. We have already talked about stabilizing your elbow, and in the next episode we will be talking about stabilizing your wrist. In a push-pull cut, in addition to rotation around your spine, you are moving your hands in opposite directions. You are also having ongoing rotation in your wrist, elbow, and shoulder joints. With proper cutting mechanics, there should be only rotation around your spine and or your shoulder. Completely horizontal cuts should not have any shoulder rotation, and vertical cuts should have no rotation around your spine. As said earlier, in a push-pull cut your wrists and elbows are rotating, so by default they cannot be stabilized. Because of that, those two joints are leaking a lot of power. Also, not having those two joints stabilized makes it way more difficult to maintain edge alignment and trajectory. Non-stabilized joints are also more prone to injury. There is not much to say about follow-through other than it is simply impossible with a push-pull cut. As your hands are moving in opposite directions at the moment of impact, there simply is absolutely nothing you can do to follow through. It might seem okay when cutting air, but if you try to do this with a solid target, you will notice that the required change of motion will get your sword stuck. Once again, SwordStem has an excellent article on this. The link is in the description and I highly recommend that you go and read it. Another issue with push-pull cuts is that there is usually ulnar deviation of the wrist, and this once again increases the risk of injury unnecessarily. We will be talking more about this in the next episode. In my opinion, push-pull cuts are not in any way mechanically suitable for cutting anything. In addition to that, they have an unnecessary high risk of injury. As said, if you are injured, you cannot train. I'm pretty sure that someone is going to bring up the point that you can get a push-pull cut through a tatami or some other cutting media. Yes, that is true. You can definitely cut tatami and other cutting media with a push-pull cut. However, that does not make push-pull cut a good cut in any way, and it does not make it any less injury prone. You can also cut with a single hand in a reverse grip and definitely get it through a tatami mat. However, I do not see anyone suggesting that we should cut with a single-handed reverse grip when actually fencing. It's just not a good cut. Before we get into the recap, go and stab that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Good structure is meant to allow effective movement, protect the joints, and prevent the leaking of energy. A good neutral posture is the foundation of a good fencing stance. Stand straight with a neutral pelvis and spine. Bring your shoulders down and back, opening your chest. Have your head between your shoulders and your chin up. Bracing activates your core and stabilizes your spine. Have both of your feet on the ground and stand on the full tripod of the foot. For a good fencing stance, start with an equally wide and deep foot placement. People don't usually have too wide of a stance. Keep your knees bent. The toes of your front foot should point forwards. Keep the toes of your rear foot angled to the side. We want to cut in a rotational motion. The center of rotation should be between our shoulders. Speed is extremely important for cutting performance. Remember to have your arms properly extended and your sword centered. Do not push-pull.